Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. My name is Justin Young. This is our part 2 of our Game of the Year for 2024 podcast. This is the one where we're going to count down the top 10 games from our podcast host and everything. So we're going to start off with a list. We have about 21 games, and we're going to narrow that down to 10 and then rank them 10 to 1, and that will be the official Saluki Games top 10 list. Joining me, as always, are Alicia Utecht, Christina Ivey, and Mario Sanders. How are all of you doing?
Good.
Ready to finally get this podcast done?
Yeah, this is our third time attempting this. Yesterday we got caught off by a fire, so you know. If I had a nickel for every time that a fire alarm has disrupted the podcast, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice.
Right.
It's not that weird on a college campus, but like yesterday there was actually a fire. It wasn't just an alarm, so
yeah.
But everyone was safe. It was not that big of a deal, but it did delay stuff and interrupted power. Yeah,
the fire department was here quickly. Everything's okay, but it's to the point now where it's just kind of funny and re-emphasizing how much we need a new building.
And the power slowly went out in different places. Like some people lost power to their computer. We lost internet pretty much immediately. But then we all came in here and we were going to try to do it, and it shut off right as Justin was about to push record.
Yeah, which was actually fortuitous timing.
Honestly,
we weren't in the middle of recording. But before we get started, as I said, this is part 2. So there is a part 1 to this podcast where we actually do our awards. So we give out awards for things like best chillaxing game, most badass game, like most aesthetically pleasing, best style, all those sorts of awards. So you can go back and listen to that. Also, in between these 2 parts, we had our 100th episode spectacular. So that podcast is up. So you can go listen to that if you have not already. And in addition to that, up on our website at salukigames.com, where you can also listen to those podcasts, we have our individual Game of the Year list. So not just from the 4 of us, but also from contributors to the website. So obviously the 4 of us are up there, but also we have lists from Kevin Mercer, who is an MFA professor here on campus, OJ Duncan, who is a former host of this podcast, Scott Jarman, who is has been a guest on this podcast multiple times, as well as Jesse Snyder. So go check those out because those lists are really a whole lot of fun. I actually enjoy reading those every year when people put them together because as much as I am into video games, there's always some games on those lists that I don't know anything about, or I've just maybe heard of them but don't really know what those games are about. And so there's always full of surprises. And as we said on the last episode, the reason we do this Game of the Year is to hopefully expose people to new games, right? Like, we don't think this is any way a definitive list, but we hope that in listening to this and reading those Game of the Year lists that you'll be exposed to some new games that maybe you haven't played before, haven't heard of before. And, maybe find somebody that fits sort of the type of games that you like, right? Because we're all very different people and have very different taste. Mm-hmm. So check all of that out at salukigames.com. And having said that, let's move forward with our working on our top 10. So I think we'll start off. I'll just read the games that we have on the list currently, and then we'll get to work at hacking and slashing. So our list as it currently stands is Balatro, Astro Bot, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, UFO 50, Mini Shoot Adventures, Helldivers 2, The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Thank Goodness You're Here, The Jackbox Survey Scramble, Pokemon TCG Pocket, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Princess Peach Showtime, Harold Halibut, Mario Party Jamboree, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, Arzette, The Jewel of Fairmore, The Plucky Squire, Liar's Bar, Pal World, and The Rise of the Golden Idol. So that's 21 games. We need to cut 11 of those to get down to our top 10, and before we start actually ranking those in order.
I will start off by saying I think an easy cut is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Just I know I know that it's a very good Call of Duty game, but just in general from our conversations, I feel like we've all kind of agreed that it didn't really blow anyone's minds.
Yeah, I mean, I put that on the list, and I'm fine with cutting it. I think Call of Duty is always like a weird game to me, and part of the reason we do this whole list is to like get to talk about games that we enjoyed over the last year. And Call of Duty is always a weird game to me because I feel like Call of Duty is the equivalent of like the Marvel film. Like it's fairly solid entertainment year after year, and like there's a whole lot of artistry that goes into making one of those, but because they're so consistent with them, for the most part, there's some off years, but like because they're generally very consistent with them, I feel like those games don't get a whole lot of appreciation, right? They don't get a whole lot of recognition. You don't see them on a lot of top 10 lists often, and it's like, yeah, I kind of get it. You don't put the Fast and Furious film on your top 10 list, but like also those are, generally pretty good entertainment. Not the last one, but like generally are often pretty good entertainment. So I just wanted to say that about Call of Duty. I think it is a very good game. If you like those sorts of games, if you want a good first-person shooter, they continue to churn out very good first-person shooters.
I would also take off Liar's Bar because I know that that's something I talked about. And, like, definitely a badass game. I enjoy playing/watching it, but it's not necessarily anything that, like, I'm going to remember this time next year as being a standout game. I think we have plenty of others on this list that would outrank it.
And so I just have a question about it because I'm fine with cutting it. But, like, I'm always interested in those sorts of, like, small Steam games that, like, come up and they're really, like, a social experiment.
Yeah.
Like, I can never remember the name of this game, but there was a game that came out a few years back that I played a bit of where they were doing the whole, like, do we split the money or do I take the money entirely for myself? And they had basically turned that into a game.
Yeah.
And I remember that like blew up for a while, and it was really kind of interesting because they developed this whole like meta game surrounding it of people talking about it. I feel like Liar's Bar is that sort of game.
It's similar to that. I don't know if I saw necessarily that much discourse around it because it wasn't so much decision based. Like there was far more luck involved in it because of like what cards you get. I mean, and there were strategies to like playing the cards and things like that. But honestly, most of what I saw was like groups of streamers who wanted to get content and have other people help with their content doing it. And I could definitely read that other stuff onto it just because of communication scholar, right? But I didn't see any of that naturally kind of develop over that game.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we're down 2. We need to cut 9 more.
It seemed like maybe the Plucky Squire was one that, from what I heard, was underwhelming. Just based in like what it was, like the hope that was originally when it was first announced, and I don't think that that's probably one that ends up on our top 10 as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's I think it is better post patch where they put in that patch that let you kind of. Apparently, that game was extremely hand-holdy at launch to the point of it just frustrating people who were playing it, who were looking for a more traditional sort of Zelda-like experience. And I think post-patch that game is actually quite playable, but it never reaches the heights that you want. And in a year where there's a very similar game in Mini Shoot Adventures that's doing a lot of the same sort of like classic Zelda sort of exploration, and it just does it a whole lot better. But Plucky Squire is still an enjoyable game. Like, I mean, I would still, if you really like the aesthetic, I think it can be worth playing.
I have a question. So we have Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom on here. I have not played that one, and I know y'all have. Was that one that was kind of in the same boat where it was a decent Zelda game, but it wasn't great? Or is that because we've also been comparing it to Tears of the Kingdom?
I never played Tears of the Kingdom.
Oh, okay.
So that's not necessarily my comparison. I think it's a perfectly fine game, but and I'm really glad that they made the attempt of like, I think similar with like the Princess Peach Showtime.
Yeah.
In the sense of like, I would love to see them try again. I hope this isn't like, because it didn't blow everybody away, that they're like, oh, but people don't want this game, so we're never going to make another one.
Right.
Like, I really do hope that they continue and like, work with it a little bit. It was a little underwhelming for me personally. I'll be honest, I never finished it. I would like to get back to it at some point.
Yeah.
But it didn't hit many of the highs that some of these other ones did.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree in that it's underwhelming compared to what you expect of a Zelda game.
Yeah.
Right? But like, so I wrote about this game and I said, on the Switch, we've had 3 of the best Zelda games ever made. Breath of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. I always get those titles confused. And then the Link's Awakening remake, because Link's Awakening was already like one of the best Zelda games ever made. And so you have 3 of the best Zelda games ever made, and then this game comes out, and there's like almost no way it doesn't pale in comparison. The thing I really liked about it was they were making another 2D Zelda, essentially, and they went and did something kind of unique with it. And, with the Echoes mechanic and like you being able to clone items, essentially. And I think that's really a lot of fun. That being said, it's not in my top 5, but I still think it's a very good game. And so I would probably hold cutting it over some others first, but I'm not sure it makes our top 10.
Oh, yeah. I would say there are others I would probably cut before it as well.
Okay.
But same thing. And I think that
Like Helldivers? I'm kidding.
It's hard because I think that
It's hard to acknowledge you.
It's hard to like even make the comparison to other Zeldas because it plays so differently.
Yeah.
I guess on that, because I know I feel very, very strongly on Princess Peach Showtime, but also I know that I'm alone in that, and I'm willing to sacrifice that over some other ones. So
I also don't think that needs to necessarily be cut. We've got like Pal World on here that I think we can probably cut before.
Yeah,
Princess Peach, right?
I was just about to cut Pal World.
Yeah.
I think Pal World was really neat, but it is a soulless game.
I think the reason that it like makes a list and it's important to talk about it as like the top games is more so about like the culture around it and the fact that it became so popular in such a weird way. Like,
yeah, it was definitely like a cultural moment.
Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about because if we're doing a top 10 list, it's one of the biggest games of the year.
Yes.
Right? And I would say it's one of the 10 biggest games of the year, but that doesn't mean it's one of the 10 best.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so, I'm fine with cutting Pal World.
So I have a question about, so I know that I love the aesthetics of Harold Halibut, but I did not play it. Is that one that stands out because of aesthetics, or is it also a great game?
It is A+ aesthetics and like B- game.
So is that one that we can cut, or
Like I would be fine with cutting it. I don't know how much we want to talk about our own personal like top 10 lists, but they're out there published now, so I guess it's fine even at the time we're recording this. That made an honorable mention for me, but it didn't make my top 10.
Gotcha.
And I think it's a game that is worth seeing just because of how cool it looks. But, there's other games I would recommend playing before it because I just think they're better games.
Gotcha.
So, I'm fine with cutting Harold Halibut, but, there is a reason that game won Best Style this year.
For sure, yeah.
And it's a game worth seeing.
That's why I wanted to like clarify, like obvious, and I've seen enough videos and gameplay of it that I'm like, oh yeah, it's something worth watching, looking at least, but I wasn't sure about the gameplay.
Let's see. So the Jackbox survey scrambles on here. I like it a lot. I think it's the best thing that they've done
In a while, but
in several years. And and that sounds like a disparaging remark, because I think those games, the Jackbox Party Packs, are very entertaining.
Yeah.
Just about every year. You know, sometimes some are better than others.
I
And
feel like it's kind of the Call of Duty situation.
Yeah,
Where it's
I
like
mean-
they're consistent with it. It's great. We want to acknowledge it. But like, is it blowing anyone's minds?
I mean, if I was trying to come up with a game to recommend to people who don't play a lot of video games,
Right.
that might be number one off of this list.
Yeah. But does that mean it's the top 10 best
Yeah.
of the
Like,
year?
I tend to think it's probably not going to make that the final top 10.
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably
Safe
one
to
we can cut.
Yeah. Let's see. What was Rise of the Golden Idol again? Like that one is just escaping me. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm blanking on that one.
So, yeah, I don't know if I talked about this in any of the other podcasts. I think I might have mentioned it in the awards podcast, because I think it did nominate it at least for something. Rise of the Golden Idol is a sort of a mystery detective game, I guess maybe is the best way to describe it. It's sort of like, you know, those logic puzzles you did as a kid where it would be like, Sue is older than Billy, but Billy is 3 years younger than Karen, you know, and you would have to kind of like puzzle your way out. So it like presents you a screen, like an environment, and it might be like a prison, and there's been a crime committed, and you have to like find clues by examining the scene and everything. And then you have to take words from those clues and arrange them into a way that like solves the crime. And you're using kind of logic to figure it out as you go through.
Yeah.
But it is, it's like the best, like if you're into mystery games, if
Yeah.
you're into like crime stories and that sort of thing, I think if you like the British mysteries and that sort of thing, I think you'd like it a whole lot. It sort of scratches that itch really well for me of, hey, I want something that's kind of just like a semi-light puzzle game that
Yeah.
I can kind of like get through on a fairly quick basis. And it also scratches that itch of what I always say Zelda does at its best with the puzzles and the dungeons, where you are incredibly frustrated when you can't figure out part of the puzzle, and then when you figure out, when it finally clicks, you feel like the smartest person in the world.
Oh yeah.
And I always think like games that can do that are really exceptional games. That being said, you know, it is a game that it ended up in my top 10, but it just barely made it into my
yeah.
top 10. So I think if there's no other support for it, I can see that one getting cut.
Okay, cool.
But I do think, you know, if you're somebody who doesn't like really like intensive video games, you're more into puzzle games, you're into mysteries, I think that game's fantastic. It's the sequel to this is the Rise of the Golden Idol. It's the sequel to the Curse of the Golden Idol. So there's actually two of these games out here. This is the first one I played, and I would highly recommend it to people.
It seems like something else that would probably fall into that category is Arzette. I think on your list, Arzette is actually lower than Rise of the Golden Idol.
Yeah.
Probably deserves to be talked about. We've done so. I think it's a great project, one that's very fun, that these developers wanted to pay homage to a generation of games or a style of games. But I don't know if it's necessarily a top 10 game.
Yeah, I mean, they're really paying homage to like one moment in time,
Yeah.
which is what I think makes it really interesting versus your sort of traditional 8-bit retro throwback game, right?
Yeah.
And this is, hey, remember those two games and that third game that never came out on the CDI that have become internet memes? What if we made a game like those where we fixed a lot of the problems in those games that made them sort of a laughing stock, but we kept all the stuff that made them a laughing stock that's actually endearing, like the goofy voices and the animation and all of that. Yeah, I mean, that's a game like, I hate to say, like, I admire it more than I actually like it, but I just think it's a better version of those games, which were terrible games. So this makes it an okay game, but it's not like, I would never recommend this game as, hey, this is an amazing game. Everyone needs to play it. It's going to blow your mind with its gameplay.
Right.
And I also think that game is extremely limited in its appeal because it's the sort of game I would have a really hard time recommending it to my nephews.
Yeah.
Because without that history and that knowledge of those CDI games, I think it would just fall really flat.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things it does exceptionally well, like the sound mixing and stuff, unless you played games during that era, or you're going to go back and play them now, which most people aren't, it's really difficult to appreciate what that game is doing and like what makes it so special.
Let me see. Mario Party Jamboree. Great game, and I think we've talked quite a bit about it being like the best installment of that franchise in a long time. Is it a top 10 game?
I think for me, I'm willing to sacrifice either Princess Peach Showtime or Mario Party Jamboree.
Okay.
Because I think that I do really want one of those games that like you can just pick up and play with anybody in the top 10.
And that's why I was asking. Like Mario Party Jamboree made my top 10.
Yeah.
So it was more of like a question as opposed to a should we cut it?
Yeah.
We've got what? 13, 14?
Yeah,
we've cut 8.
Yeah.
So we need to cut
Three more.
Three more.
I think maybe one way to look at it is, from what both of you have said about Mario Party Jamboree, is that Mario Party Jamboree is actually a really successful game. Whereas I think all of our kind of view of Princess Peach is we really admire what Princess Peach has done, but we don't think it's like maybe the best game.
Yeah.
And like, whereas I don't think we have as many qualifiers or questions about Mario Party Jamboree as actually being a good game.
Right.
And so that would be my leaning. If we're cutting one of them, I would cut some Super Princess Peach, or no, what, Princess Peach Showtime.
Super Princess Peach.
No, that's the what, DS game? Or,
Yeah.
I would definitely cut that.
But like, I guess my sort of feeling about it is, I also admire Princess Peach Showtime more than I do Mario Party Jamboree, because Mario Party Jamboree is what, the third Mario Party we've gone for the Switch, and it may be the best one. I can't say I haven't played it.
Yeah, it is.
It easily is.
Yeah.
But it's also the third one of those, right? Which is almost like Call of Duty, and it's like iterative.
I hope that they continue to keep trying with Princess Peach like they have with Mario Party, because like I think that the idea of that is fabulous, and there are parts of it that I really, really enjoy.
Right.
The demo like was great, and if the game had gone beyond that, I would have been fully satisfied. But yeah, I would agree with cutting Princess Peach over Mario.
I think Mario's point earlier when he noted, we've gotten Echoes of Wisdom, Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and this Princess Peach Showtime both this year, right?
Yep.
So we've gotten 2 classic female Mario or Nintendo characters who really haven't had their own games before. There was Super Princess Peach. There were the CDI Zelda games, where Zelda was the star of one of those. And we haven't gotten these games before, and I worry, what really scares me is that Nintendo looks at the sales of these, they look at the review scores, and they say, oh, well, these were failures. People didn't like them because they're girl games. No, people didn't like them because they're not the best games.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, please do a second version. Like, do a sequel, make a better version of this game.
Yeah.
Because it's not the ideal that's inherently flawed, it's the execution that's not perfect yet. And I say that not even saying that they're bad games. I really like Echoes of Wisdom. And I liked some of what I played of Princess Peach. Like, I just don't think it's not the game I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I really liked Princess Peach Showtime, but I'm willing to have it not part of the group's top 10.
The two that I'm looking at now, and I think a discussion about them would help. So Indiana Jones is another one of those games that was, like, the aesthetics of it were awesome. It looked like Harrison Ford. Was it, in terms of gameplay, was it something that would make this list?
I mean, I kind of been thinking the same thing. I didn't play a ton of it. I mostly made it through like the first main stealth sequence.
Yeah.
I don't know how the game expands beyond that. I'm not a big stealth game person.
Yeah, same.
I think that at least if that's the like majority of the game, if there are moments, sure, totally fine. But so I'm not like, oh my God, that game, but it does absolutely look incredible. The Ford impression is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily opposed, but I know you had it fairly high on your list. So I don't know if you want to talk, if you played it, you probably played it more than I did.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how far you got. Did you get to the Vatican when all that opens up?
I got to like the priest friend,
Okay.
but I didn't get to explore beyond that.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of stealth in it. But like, you know, is the sort of thing like, okay, you're gonna make an Indiana Jones game. Is it going to be a first-person shooter? It is a first-person game. There are scenes where you are shooting, but like also, like it's not going to be a Call of Duty game because that doesn't really fit Indiana Jones, right? So Indiana Jones, like if you watch the movies, is kind of stealthy and like kind of sneaking around, right? And,
it makes sense as a genre.
And I'll say about the stealth element that it did not bother me as somebody who's not the biggest stealth game fan.
Oh, yeah.
Like when I think of stealth game, I think of the original Splinter Cell, which was a brutally like unforgiving stealth game. It was particularly for it being sort of like a new genre at the time, at least from that perspective, right? There had been kind of stealth games before that, but and like to me, this is a pretty forgiving stealth game. It's the sort of stealth game where like somebody sees you and you can run up and kill them, and then or you knock them out, you don't kill them, and you're back into stealth. It's not like, oh, well, the entire mission is over because you got spotted.
Yeah, I mean, in that first stealth section, I definitely had to go a little Rambo on like 30 Italian guards, and then, okay, we're back to stealth mode now.
I mean, you're doing it to fascists, so like they very explicitly up front say, oh, these guys are fascist, and you're like, all right, yeah, thanks, Indy. I don't feel bad at all. And I think for me, as far as like big budget AAA games, this was the best one I played this year.
Okay.
But that's not saying it's the best game I played this year, but a big budget AAA games, I think it is the most successful at doing that. Like the sort of thing that we expect from, like, say, an Uncharted game or, a Baldur's Gate or something of that level. And, I'm not including Astro Bot in that because Astro Bot's more like a double A game. So I think that's a really good game. I would include it before some of these others.
Fair. The other one that I was thinking of that could possibly be at the bottom of the list that's left is UFO 50. Only because I haven't.
I'll be honest with you, UFO 50 is probably like my number 2 game this year.
Oh, okay.
I would cut Helldivers before I cut UFO 50.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. The only reason is because I also know that I came to the podcast late this year, and so I didn't get a chance to hear us talk about some of these games as much. So that's the only reason I'm asking about it.
I think UFO 50 is, like I said, one of the best games that came out this year. I think it is a pretty incredible achievement in game design and game development. And no, I think that, like I said, there are others that I would far cut before that one.
Fair.
And I mean, it's a little lower on my list than like number 2, but and that's only because I think it's like not an entirely consistent game, right? Because it's 50 different games, and some of them are home runs, some of them are games like I think I commented that when you would go to the video store as a kid and rent a game, and you're like, is a Russian roulette. One of these games is going to be complete garbage, and there's some games in there that are like completely forgettable, but there's still 50 of them. And you're going to find, 20 of them, let's say, that like you really, really enjoy, and that number is going to vary, right, from person to person. But I think Mario is right. It's like a really, just kind of an impressive achievement for somebody to sit down and say, we're going to make a game that's 50 whole new games, and they are entire games. Like they're not mini games.
Yeah, it's not like a Mario Party mini game.
Right.
It's like I think we've talked about it a number of times. One of them is like a near, 15, 20 hour RPG.
Oh, that's right.
And so,
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think the one that I would return to, I mean, granted, obviously there are ones I haven't played on this list, but the ones that I have played, the one I would probably cut first would be Echoes of Wisdom.
I was going to say, is it time to cut Echoes of Wisdom? Justin's looking at the list closely.
I guess of the games I played, Echoes of Wisdom and Indiana Jones would be my bottom 2 that remain of games that I've played. Obviously, we've heard about Indiana Jones. I am putting Echoes of Wisdom as a potential cut out there.
Yeah, I could see that. The other one I would say, and I know Alicia's going to have a heart attack over this, but like the other one.
Well, I'm used to you shitting on my games.
I actually like a lot of the games that you like. The other game that like I just was not super impressed with is Pokemon Pocket.
I think that's valid.
Like, it's not that I think it's bad. It's just like, it's just a mobile game, and it's like fine, and it plays like a lot of. It reminds me of a lot of those like kind of collector sort of gotcha games on like phones, right? Like there's a Star Wars one, there's a Marvel one, there's the WWE like card game, and so it doesn't do anything exceptionally better or different than those games. Like I don't feel like it even does what Marvel Snap as far as like interface and smoothness of playing. I don't think it's as good of a game as that. And that's nothing against Pokemon. Like I like Pokemon fine enough. I'm just not a diehard fan.
No, and I think that's totally valid. I think I wanted to mention it here because I do think it's compared to even just a lot of other mobile games, and I think that it does a really good job at making the TCG format into a video game, but I think it doesn't. I'm okay with it being in the top 21 and not in the top 10, so I'm okay with us cutting that.
So do we want to cut that and Zelda?
Yeah.
Because that gets us down to 10.
That gets us down to 10,
Yeah.
Is there anything we'd rather cut than one of those? Just asking, since we're getting down to our final 10.
Yeah,
the only one that I could really speak, just because it's the one I'm least familiar with, would be Final Fantasy VII, but I know that's the one that...
That's the one I'll fight for.
I was about to say, I had Pokemon and Final Fantasy together as the ones that Alicia is going to fight for. So if we're cutting Pokemon, we got to keep Final Fantasy.
Yeah, no, that's...
I was saying, and I'll fight for Final Fantasy over Zelda Echoes of Wisdom too. So
yeah, I've sort of figured.
I haven't played that, but like I've only heard like fantastic things about it. And like the biggest criticism I've heard of that game is the ending.
Yes.
Like people disappointed in the ending, but like
the ending is a hot mess.
But
Echoes of Wisdom being like 11th on this list, I still think is pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's perfectly valid to say that's not a top 10 game.
Yeah.
Like I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it because I really enjoyed the mechanic. I really enjoy, drowning my enemies.
Take that out of context.
Look,
I really enjoy
you're my
drowning
enemy,
my enemies.
I was about to say, so stay on your good side, is what you're saying to me.
I don't live that far from a lake.
Oh, no.
We're going Jason Voorhees style.
Avoid Justin's house. Got it.
Hey, you guys want to go boating this weekend? Especially you, Christina.
Listen, as the horror fan on the thing, no.
Man.
But I mean, I think that game, sort of like the God Hand stuff in
Tears of the Kingdom.
Tears of the Kingdom, where I think that's really a lot of fun to play around with. I think this is like a simpler version of that. And so if that was especially for kids, if that was too overwhelming, Tears of the Kingdom, which I can see it being like trying to put stuff together.
I love that you say especially for kids. Then there's me overwhelmed by Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
Well,
And Alicia.
I mean, probably
It's
for
me. I am a child.
probably for a lot of people, right? Like I feel like this is getting to a lot of that sort of gameplay in a more simplified manner, and so I think that makes it a really high recommend to certain people from me.
For sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that game is fine being in the top 12.
Perfect.
So that gives us our top 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yep.
down to 10. So I'll read these off real quick to us. Our top 10 is Balatro, Astro Bot, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, UFO 50, Mini Shoot Adventures, Helldivers 2, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Thank Goodness You're Here, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Mario Party Jamboree. Almost missed that.
Well, I think that's valid, though, because I was going to say, I feel like Super Mario Party Jamboree is probably in the bottom half.
Yeah, I was thinking that along with maybe, well, I don't know, because you thought Indiana Jones was at your bottom. You kind of ranked it higher. So.
Yeah.
Like I said, of the games that I've played, Indiana Jones would be the lowest. I think of the games on this, that of our remaining top 10s, the ones that I played were Balatro, Astro Bot, UFO 50, Mini Shoot, Helldivers, and Indiana Jones. And thank goodness you're here. Indiana Jones would probably be the lowest on that list for me.
Yeah.
So I would probably put forward as like our number 10, either Indiana Jones or Mario Party.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Or thank goodness you're here. Like I said, depending on how you feel about that one.
I would
The head snap up from Justin, though, when you said, thank goodness you're here in the bottom.
I would rank Thank Goodness You're Here a little higher just because of the novelty of it. But it's also more my kind of game than Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a bias.
I think Mario Party Jamboree at 10 probably makes a lot of sense. It's a good game. It's a very good one of those, but it is, it's not doing anything exceptionally different.
Yeah.
And so, it making the top 10, I think, is the achievement for that game.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then if people are saying they like Thank Goodness You're Here ahead of Indiana Jones, then I'm fine with that. If that's the ranking, I think Indiana Jones is one of the 10 best games of the year. Where it ranks is not as important to me as I think that game should be on a list.
Top 10. Yeah, yeah.
So if we want to put that at number 9, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And then I think it gets a little bit more complicated because I think a lot of these games are very different from one another and offer some very different things.
Yeah.
I am a little shocked that Helldivers 2 managed to squeeze into the top 10. I thought we all agreed that was out of the top 10. I'm joking. It was in my top 10.
No, it was either UFO 50 or Helldivers 2. Weren't you paying attention?
Only one space game is allowed to be in it.
Well, then shoot, there goes Astro Bot.
Yeah, that's true. We're spacist. So
I think I would be okay with Thank Goodness You're Here being the lower half of this. I just had it above, at least in my brain, the Indiana Jones. I don't know.
I mean, I think the thing that game does exceptionally well is its humor.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds almost like a slight, but video games aren't funny.
No.
I mean, they're funny when you're 8 or 9,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the video game is going, I took an arrow to the knee. Like, remember that from that other video game?
The poop monster from Conquer.
Right.
Bad fur day.
And you're like, okay, like you can do memes or you can do like just, scatological humor and like that's about it. And like so many games that try to be funny to me fall really, really flat. And that's a game that actually legitimately made me laugh so hard I had to pause the game and stop playing for a minute.
Yeah.
And I can't say anything about the gameplay being great because it's just an adventure game.
Yeah.
And it's really, in a lot of cases, just a fetch quest of go get this and bring it here. But man, like, when's the last time you played a game that genuinely made you laugh out loud? I mean, maybe a line of dialogue here or there, but like, just
when you think of
repeatedly.
like repeatedly funny games, they're all, I think of like Earthbound. How old is that game?
Yeah. I mean,
know?
it's going to be something like that, right?
Yeah.
I will say, I think the other thing that I appreciate about Thank Goodness You're Here is that it's like maybe 2 hours long.
Yeah.
Right.
I know some people might take that as like a knock against it. I'm like very much okay.
Sometimes you need those shorter games. Like
Yeah.
you can't get as involved.
You could easily play and beat this in one sitting.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's similar to Mario Party in the fact that it's made the top 10 is enough of a success for it. So like if it goes at number 8 so that we can acknowledge the humor and, the brevity of it, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't really see it being much higher than this on like a personal thing. So like I think it's probably pretty good at number 8. I don't know if I guess that other people disagree. Justin, I'm mostly looking at you because you're the person that has the most experience with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Thanks.
I think you bringing up the fact that it's like a short game, right? Which sort of makes sense for the humor as well. Like, right? Like, can you keep up that level of humor over 40 hours? No.
Yeah.
And the fact that it gets in, it gets out, is very funny consistently for that 2 or so hours that you're playing it. I think is a really great achievement. And I think, again, this game getting onto a top 10 list, because the thing that we really want with a game like this is to raise awareness of it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's not why we put it on a top 10 list, but like, that's why we do a top 10 list. It's like, hey, these are games that are worth playing. And I would recommend this game to most people with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Not everyone.
if
Is that
mowing
most people?
if mowing down flowers that have like said their undying love to each other doesn't kick you in the giggle dick, then this is not gonna work.
And if phrases like giggle dick don't tickle your fancy, then this also might not be the game for you, because it is very much the sort of game that leans into that sort of shenanigans.
All right, I think now is where we're starting to get into really touchy territory, honestly.
Yeah. I say now is where it's going to get really, really tough.
I might put up at this point Mini Shoot Adventures.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Oh, okay.
That was the next one I would probably go.
Based on how y'all talked about it the last one, I thought y'all were going to fight for that to be like a top 3. So
It's again just sort of, so I'm like mentally going through my head. Like I'll just say it. For me, Ballatro's number 1, UFO 50's number 2, Helldivers is number 3, Astro Bot's number 4, Mini Shoot is number 5. I haven't played the other 2. So for me, Mini Shoot would be the next cut, because I think there are stronger feelings about Final Fantasy and Prince of Persia.
Yeah, I think Mini Shoot Adventures is a really wonderful game, but it's also a sort of slight game.
yeah.
It's fairly short, but it gets in, gets out. There's really never a dull moment in that time that you're playing it. It doesn't really break any new ground. It is very much, hey, remember A Link to the Past? What if you played that as a shooter?
Yeah.
And I think it does that really, really well.
Can I say something really quick?
Yeah.
I think of this list, this is probably the first one I would recommend to people. Even though we have it at number 7, I think I would recommend this game before any of the others, because in some ways I think it is
Okay, I
like
see what you're saying.
universal, accessible, that like anybody could probably enjoy, whereas I think some of the others are more niche.
I thought you were saying you wouldn't recommend any of the ones below this. And I was like, you wouldn't recommend
no.
Thank Goodness You're Here?
No, I like
Yeah,
if,
I get it.
yeah.
If you had to recommend a game off this list to somebody who doesn't play video games, like
Yeah.
this one makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it's a game I would recommend to everyone.
Yeah.
Like it's I think accessible enough that really until you get to some of the post game content, you're never getting challenged super hard in it either. And not to say there's no challenge to it, but like it's not something that's going to have you throwing your controller or like in tears, like trying to get through it. And so it's just a really pleasant experience all the way through. And that sounds like feigned praise, but like it's not. Like, how often do you play a game that start to finish you're like, this was just entirely enjoyable, I have nothing negative to say about this. And it almost feels like a game that sort of like fell out of time. Like you could imagine this game having been like a PlayStation 1 game. It almost feels of that era of like, hey, let's all try to copy what Nintendo has done. Let's make a Zelda and with our own little twist on it. It has a terrible name. Maybe that's the biggest criticism I can
I still
lay
can't
against
believe
it.
the apostrophe at the end of Mini Shoot is not a typo. Like that boggles my mind.
Looks like the printer messed up,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I can completely see that game at number 7. And that's despite like all the praise I can throw on it.
Okay, so next, this is what I'm going to propose. Does Final Fantasy / Prince of Persia, and then I'm going to back away slowly.
You're just gonna end it there.
That because like I think like what Mario said, I kind of have in my head based on our conversations like my top 5.
I would probably, of those two, propose Final Fantasy VII.
Because it's like a remake.
One, because it's a remake. It's obviously like so much more than just a remake.
Yeah, for sure.
But I know you watched it, correct? We know the story of Final Fantasy VII. We know it's fantastic. None of us actually played it, though, right? That would be my reason to put it lower than like games we actually played. Even if we watched it and we know how great it is, I would struggle to put it higher than something that we actually played.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think Final Fantasy, like it gets hit with the criticism being a remake, right? But like as we've talked about, this is almost like, hey, we're going back to the source material and doing an entirely new adaptation.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's so much more than what we normally think of as a remake of a game. Super Mario RPG was a remake, but that was a very faithful remake. They were just redoing the graphics, changing some quality of life improvements. Whereas this is almost like a reimagining. It might be a better term than remake.
Yeah.
Of those games. And so like I hate to slight those games because I did play the first one. I have not played this one yet. I think that first one is really, really good at what it's doing. And so much more than I ever expected them to do. Because like for years, I could never figure out when they talked about doing a Final Fantasy VII remake, fans demanded, begged for it. I could never figure out like, just go make it. Like it's not that hard. And then like seeing what they did, like obviously like they're making 3 entirely new games essentially, right? And taking the bare bones of what that game originally was and kind of tossing it out in between those games, like spreading it out a bit. Which that game was originally 3 discs, so it makes sense making it into 3 games, right?
Yeah. Plus then integrate too. So
Yeah.
really 4.
But I guess the thing I would say for Prince of Persia is that Prince of Persia is a new game, right? It is entirely from the ground up new game. It's not groundbreaking, right? It is very much a Metroidvania. If you've played, a 2D Metroid, if you've played one of the, later Castlevania games on the DS and the Game Boy Advance and all those. You've certainly played a game like this before. This is just like one of the best one of those style of games ever made.
Yeah.
And for an entirely new game to come out and like kind of stake its claim as this is one of the best one of these you'll ever play, at least for now, until Silk Song comes out. That's the best thing ever. I think is a really big achievement. So personally, I would put it ahead of Final Fantasy VII. But that's my personal feeling on it.
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of have a hang up on on it not making the top 5 because we didn't play it, because it is a game I would play if I could afford a PS5. But I think, again, this is our collective top 10, and so I think these are tough ones because, like, I know I'm the one who engaged the most with Rebirth by a significant amount. Justin's the one who engaged the most with Prince of Persia: Lost Crown by a significant amount. These other ones have a majority who engaged with them, so I think that's where this is really tough for me. Is like, because they're such different games.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they are.
And so, like, the fact that there's only one person in the group who engaged with them the most makes it harder, I feel like, to have I don't know. I would really like to see Rebirth in the top 5. I think that the reimagining is the perfect word for it in terms of, not only the story and character work that it did, but also, the way that it incorporates it. Well, it is a phenomenal adaptation of the original game, and I think for me that stands out to me more than being a really good Metroidvania. I mean, my brain kind of starts to at this point say, okay, Prince of Persia is a really phenomenal Metroidvania. Super Mario Party Jamboree is a really phenomenal Mario Party, versus Rebirth feeling completely original, but I also did not engage with Prince of Persia at all, so I don't know how original the story beats were, how original the gameplay was. That's kind of where my brain is at.
Well, I don't think you can hold it against that it's a Metroidvania.
Oh no, certainly not holding it against it. But
when Final Fantasy Rebirth is a
JRPG,
right? And it's a remake, and it's
the
second game using this, in this game series.
So
right?
rock, paper, scissors? No.
I honestly might be rock, paper, scissors. I'm not gonna. Okay.
What do you think, Mario?
I mean, I would probably personally lean more towards Prince of Persia, but that's my personal opinion. I think, like I said, I can understand how great we've seen it get played, how much we've watched it, how much we appreciate the story, but the fact that none of us played it is a hang up for me in terms of putting it the top 5 game of the year that none of us actually played. And I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily a fair criticism, but I think the other thing is, would this be a top 5 game if it wasn't Final Fantasy VII, right? Like, because by all metrics, Metaphor Refantasio should probably be a top 5 game on this list, but none of us played it, so we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that is my reasoning for why I personally would put Prince of Persia ahead of it, but I'm just like one guy.
I'm just one guy.
Very
what are you
humble there at
thinking?
the end.
I honestly am not pulled either way because both of these are franchises that I don't engage with at all, and have only been going based off of what you two have said about it. Like I don't have a dog in the fight kind of thing.
Well, I guess I'm willing to concede to the majority.
I mean,
So if we want to put
yeah.
if we want to put Rebirth at 6, I will concede to the majority.
Okay. Yeah, because that ends up being the majority because I like abstain.
I feel like you should try the Sands of Time. I feel like that's a Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's a game you would like.
Okay. I should do that.
I assume then we're putting Prince of Persia at 5.
Yeah, because the other games I think top that.
All right, let's do the top 4 now.
So my personal next one that I would put up would be Astro Bot. I know other people aren't going to agree with that, so I would be fine, honestly, with either UFO 50 or Helldivers
Yeah.
here.
That's difficult because like Astro Bot to me was just a really fun game and was easy enough for me to pick up and play. All of the nostalgia of PS, like older PS games. I didn't get to play UFO 50, but based on what you've said, it's like a master class in development, especially because of like the breadth of the type of games that are there, even though some of them were not great. But having a large amount of games, including a multi-hour like RPG is pretty phenomenal. So it's like if we're coming down to like what I consider to be best, like Astro Bot, of course, was a lot of fun, but that's only because I didn't play UFO 50.
Right.
So
I would put Astro Bot ahead of UFO 50 just because I think, again, you know, I said this earlier, I'm kind of more impressed by UFO 50. I'm more kind of think it's a really like grand achievement than I think it's like the best game on this list, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the inconsistency of UFO 50, and then there's the issue with it that, you know, is a big issue to me from my perspective. This is sort of the same issue I have with RZ is like, how do I recommend this to other people? Because UFO 50 is like a game made for me, right? Somebody who grew up playing this generation of games that they're trying to emulate. And so there are things I really like in that game where I go, wow, this is really nice because this reminds me of Beachhead on the Commodore 64. But if you're not reminded of Beachhead, does it just kind of fall more flat? And I mean, obviously, I don't think it is for you, Mario, since you really like it.
Oh, no, I think that's totally fair. I think I said it when I first talked about it. I wish there was a way, or they like, you know, even if it's just on Steam, sold those games individually as well. Because then it could be like, listen, the full game, like if you want to experience the full thing, great. But just go buy X game for like $2.
Yeah.
Try that one out because that one is worth playing.
Yeah.
And I think the hard thing, like, and this is why I'm fine if we want to put UFO 50 at 4. It's also hard to judge it when it is literally 50 different games, right?
Yeah.
Like I had talked, you know, said my top 24 list might just be a ranking of the 50 UFO 50 games, because it's like there's so much there that it's almost hard to like really almost judge it fairly, because it's
Yeah.
like, do you judge it by its best game? Do you
Or
judge
its-
it by its worst
Yeah.
game?
Yeah.
Do you judge it by its average game?
Yeah.
Which, depending on how you feel about it, like is going to be different. I think that is one of my favorite things. Have followed like the UFO 50 subreddit, and I think one of my favorite things about there is everybody making their tier lists of the 50 games, and there's definitely like some like these ones are, you know, commonly towards the top, but there is still a variety of like,
Right.
this one was my favorite game, I hated this game, whereas then you get somebody commenting, oh, I loved this game, you know. And so I think that like that is why it's so high for me. I
Yeah.
think in some ways I will probably, like in the long term, have more memories playing UFO 50 than I will over Astro Bot,
Yeah.
and that's why it's higher on my list. Astro Bot is a phenomenal game, but when I compare it to, like I said, the the Super Mario Odysseys and stuff like that, which is also a fantastic game. I've played games like Astro Bot, and I think same thing that I just said about Final Fantasy VII. If this were a Nintendo game, I don't know if it would be as significant if it would hold as much weight, because we expect that from Nintendo. But because Sony did it and we don't expect it from Sony, it's like, oh, wow, what an incredible achievement for Sony. But all that said, I'm fine if we put UFO 50 here at 4.
Yeah, I think, what you said about like people's different reactions. I was reading an article when I was writing up my comments about games, and somebody had ranked, and they had given like 5-star ratings to all 50 games. And I was like, oh, well, like, I love Mortal out of that. I think Mortal is like a fantastic game. That's the one where you have a set number of lives, and you can turn them into stone or make them explode, and use it to like puzzle solve your way through a platforming level. And they like gave it like 3 out of 5 stars. And I was like, what in the world is wrong with you? Like, this is like
one of the best games that of the however many you've played thus far. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like one of the best games in that collection. And so like, that's very like kind of entertaining to see how people react differently to the games. I mean, I think my argument for Astro Bot is that Astro Bot's just a more consistent game. Yeah. Like, I think concept wise, yes, UFO 50 is above. I think gameplay wise, UFO 50 is kind of all over the place. Yeah. Which is, again, part of the appeal of it, right? Like, I think UFO 50 is a worse game if all 50 of those they're not mini games, but all 50 of the games in there are all like at the level of Mortal. I think it's actually made a better game by some of them being stinkers. Because I think that's more honest and reflective of what a collection of a console's lifespan actually would be. I don't know if that was done intentionally. I can't imagine they were doing it with like real intent, but they do like make games and then make sequels to them where the sequels are like improvements on them. So like there had to at least be like this idea in designing the game of, let's make this game, and then how do we make something we have to hold some stuff back because we're going to make a sequel to it. We're going to make a sequel to that.
Did you play the Mooncat game?
Yeah.
The inscrutability of the controls of that game make me feel like some of this is definitely intentional. Yeah. Of like, we are going to make this, like a far more difficult to experience than we could, right?
Or
like,
if not intentional, it's definitely, I don't know, one of those things that's like, you know what? That's not the greatest, but it's fine because some of those games weren't. It's like they get done with it and they're like, oh, this is difficult. Instead of trying to fix it, they just move on.
Honestly, it's kind of giving the vibe of like, I remember, was it last year or 2 years ago, the Garbage Pail Kids game? Yeah. That they were like, oh, this was on the NES. And then it came out and you were like, it plays like an NES game. And like that's kind of the vibe I get from what you guys have said about the collection, where like some of them are kind of stinkers.
And and like that game that very much recaptured the vibe of an NES game. Yeah. And like they actually made that it can run on NES. They I think produce cartridges that will run on your NES.
But where it's like it's very intentional that it is that.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about like controls being inscrutable, yeah, because a lot of games, like if you go back and you play NES games now, like people when they think about NES games, they think of Zelda, they think of Metroid, they think of Super Mario Brothers. They don't think of all the garbage that was on that system. And I would say the majority of the games on that system are garbage. Yeah. And that's I love the NES, but like, like go play Knight Rider on the NES and like,
or don't.
Well, that's why I use that one in the UFO 50 as an example, because it's like every other game you've played uses the D-pad for movement as you would expect it would, and that one doesn't. And you're like, what the hell is happening? Like it took 20 minutes just to figure out how to consistently move forward in that game. And so that to me is like, that indicates some level of intention, and like we are purposefully doing something that is going to be a frustrating experience because that is
True to life.
Yeah. And so I could go on and talk about it for far longer, but I think I'm good if we put UFO 50 here at number 4.
Okay.
Pause for everyone to write.
Right. And then Astro Bot number 3.
I mean, to be honest, I was fine putting up either UFO 50 or Helldivers there. Nobody talked about Helldivers, so like I understand.
Helldivers, like similarly to Pal World, was an incredible like boom moment, but also was a very good game on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, Helldivers is night and day compared to Power World. I
Yeah.
don't think Power World is that good of a game.
I just meant like in
Yeah.
terms of like was
It's doing the same thing.
There's a cultural moment, community
yes,
moment
yes,
there.
Yes, exactly.
And when we think about like gaming communities and like the culture of gaming,
Right.
usually it's not a lot of positive, and there was
Exactly.
seemingly a lot of positive.
And
here.
honestly, like your
For a
argument,
game about fascism.
right? Your argument about UFO 50 about the subreddit and stuff is almost what swayed me to push it to 3, because like is part of the criterion of a best game one that unites community and is like a gamer's game kind of thing. So I think like Balatro and Helldivers is a clear 1 and 2 here. So Astro Bot being 3rd makes sense to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with Astro Bot at 3. I think Helldivers fell on my list for exactly the reasons I talked about when we were doing our awards, which I think that game, when you're playing with a group of people is one of the best experiences from this year.
Yeah.
Right? From 2024, it's one of the best experiences of playing a game that you'll have.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off.
But I think when you're not, right, when you're playing with, grouping up with randoms, I think the game can, not always, but like can suffer significantly from that.
I think that may be why I would put it as like the number 2.
I would not put it at number 1.
Yeah.
Like to me, it doesn't go at number 1 at all. Like, because I just don't think it's the number 1 game of the year. But that's me personally, right?
Yeah.
But like, I completely understand that game being like very high on somebody's list, and like I said, it made my top 10. It just wasn't as high on my top 10. And I think it's a game that very much is going to depend on your experience. So it's almost like Liar's Bar in that regard, right? Like your personal experience is going to highly color how you feel about this game.
For sure.
And that sort of personal experience doesn't play into a lot of games, right? But like we've been talking about this, like we talked about that as an issue with UFO 50, right? Like what is your experience with this sort of generation of games? The more experience I feel like you have, the more you appreciate UFO 50.
Yeah.
And the less you have, the more I worry, though I don't know how people are going to respond to it. And again, or is that same issue, right? Yeah. I think there are games that are much more accessible. I think Astro Bot's a really wonderful game. I think I think if Nintendo made this, we would all be talking about it as one of the 5 best games of the year, right? Like in the same way that we did when the Kirby Forgotten Land.
Yeah.
I always am unsure of the subtitles of games. It's the 3D Kirby game.
Yeah. Forgotten Land. You had it right.
And like we talked about that, right? Because that was just a very good platformer, and it was a very surprising platformer. For them to come out and make a 3D Kirby and it be as good as it was. And I feel like, if Nintendo put this out, it would be in our top 5. I don't know where it would be in that top 5, but like I feel like we'd all be talking about it. I think one of the things that this game does, and we've talked about this in best moments, one of the things that it does so exceptionally well that I think elevates it above the pack-in one that came installed on PS5s is the like, hey, we're going to take these sort of classic PlayStation franchises and we're going to kind of give them a nod and a sort of minor rebirth within this game.
Yeah.
And that was the thing I was least expecting. And it's the thing that most endeared that game to me as somebody who has history dating back to the original PlayStation up through each subsequent system. So I think they do that exceptionally well. And so, you know, Mario, you were talking about the game you would recommend to somebody off this list.
Yeah.
This is the game I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah.
This is like the first game. Like even over Balatro, I would recommend this
Sure,
game
absolutely.
to people because I feel like this is the game that almost anyone could pick up and play.
Yeah.
If you've ever played a video game, right? But I don't think this game is going to be number one on our list because I'm pretty sure I know what number one's going to be.
Yeah.
And I can completely see somebody saying their experience with Helldivers elevates it over this. And I'm not going to argue it's in the top 3. So if we want to put it at number 3 and Helldivers at number 2, I think that's what we're arguing, right?
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean that follows pretty closely to what my feelings would be. And so when I say like if Nintendo were to make this, we wouldn't be talking about it as much. I know that yes, it would still be it. I think that there would be an expectation there, and so I feel like the surprise of Sony actually doing this is what has raised the discourse around it. I think that's been a significant part of it, right?
Absolutely.
It's certainly what we've talked about a lot when it comes to it. I think when I say like Mini Shoot would probably be the first game I would recommend off of this list. I think that's probably just due to it being on a computer and not needing a $500 machine to play it. But if somebody had a PS5, it would be the first game I would say you should buy this game and play this game.
Mini Shoot's also like $20.
Yeah, of
versus
course.
like 70.
That said, I think Astro Bot is, it's a great game. It's one that if you are a PlayStation fan as well, that's one to, if you can't play it, go watch what did we call them? The
Let's Play?
The nostalgia levels of where it sort of uses the other franchises.
Yes.
I think, those are some of the, the best moments, the most exciting moments of that game.
And I think this speaks to, like, we have a category in the awards for best surprise of the year. And like I think that was one of our most contentious categories this year when we were debating. And I think what we're getting to here is how much that element of not necessarily just surprise, but like sort of novelty means to us when we're looking at games. I mean, we talked about this with Final Fantasy and Prince of Persia, right? We've talked about this with multiple games or debates that we've been having today is, does that novelty, what does that value play into when you're looking at games, right? And that a game can be extremely good, but if it doesn't have that novelty factor, it sort of hurts it, which is probably not fair. Yeah. But like it's the reality, right? Like
is it that if the novelty's not there, it hurts it, or is it that if the novelty is there, it boosts it?
Well, that might be a better way to phrase it. Like it's more of a plus than a negative.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think if you're asking, I think the criticism of Astro Bot of it, well, this is very much one of those, right? Like the idea that we can imagine Nintendo making it. I cannot imagine Nintendo making Helldivers 2.
Oh, no.
And that's
It'd be
not
a very different video game.
It'd be quite the world where Nintendo made Helldivers 2.
I mean, we'd have Squid Boy and Squid Girl.
That's
in it.
what I was thinking.
Honestly, Splatoon,
Yeah.
Squid Divers, or whatever you want to be, honestly, probably pretty sick. But
and my point in saying that is that like Helldivers 2, I think, is an experience unlike anything I've played in a video game before, and that like that's a little misleading because yes, I've played first-person shooters and team combat games and stuff, and it is really one of those. But I think the way that it's packaged up and presented to you feels like a wholly new experience, right? And so when we're putting this above something like Prince of Persia or Final Fantasy or Astro Bot, to me, that is the reasoning that we're putting it at that level. It's because we're saying, hey, this is a one-time experience, right? You're not going to get this again. Yeah. That like this sort of novelty, this sort of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this in a video game.
Yeah, it's like I said, on my personal list, probably number 3 of the year, but I think it's by far the most fun I had playing a video game this year. And there's part of me that's like, I almost don't want to return to it because you know, like if it starts to like, you know, wane in some ways.
And I think that's the biggest criticism of the game is is it that perfect moment, right? Like we talked about it having that moment in the way that Power World did. Is this a game that 10 years from now people return to and play and will have that same effect? And that I don't know. Like, and I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, well, no, it absolutely won't. Whereas some of these other games, you know, even like far down the list, right? Like Mini Shoot Adventures, can you play that 10 years from now and will it still be a good game? Absolutely, right? And some of these games will almost assuredly wane a little.
Yeah, it's one of those games, and usually I'm not this way. It's one of those games where it's better if you are more underpowered, I feel like, because I played in the like also the stages where, you know, my friends they had played a lot more and they're like stronger than all the enemies and you just kind of like wipe through them and it's like, okay. But like there's something about like you are just getting absolutely decimated. Like it's one of those games where losing sometimes feels better than winning does. Because of that chaos that ensues from it.
Yeah, and I think it's the game on this list that this year people were having the conversation of, let me tell you about my experience. Let me tell you what happened to me. And I think that when you talk about community, like you mentioned that earlier, like what is the value of community and like evaluating a game?
Right.
Like that's something that you always hear from game developers when they're talking about like emergent gameplay and, you know, this idea that we're giving you the tools, we're giving you Legos and you can build, you know, your experience out of it. Yeah. And I think Helldivers does that in a way that very few video games manage to accomplish.
Yeah.
It does it better than Call of Duty. And it's aping Call of Duty in a lot of ways, but like it does that element better. And I think that's, you know, part of why it's so well liked because I think people had that experience. I think there's probably a lot of people are like, do I want to go back? Do I want to tarnish that memory?
It's one of those games where it's like, yeah, 5 years from now, people may not go back and play it, but people will probably remember the experience of playing it. And I think that's like I said, a remarkable feat.
I also think, you know, kind of to put it into perspective to other games on this list, we'll get another Mario Party. And we'll get another good Mario Party. It may not be the next one. The next one, occasionally...
It may be 3 from now.
Right. I mean, occasionally they make bad Mario Party games. I mean, that's my opinion. Like, some of them aren't as good as others.
Number 8 with the Bowser on the Wii U.
No, 8 was good. 8 was on the Wii.
Oh, what was the one with Bowser?
I think
where on the Wii U?
9, you're on like the car as a team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, is that the one you're talking about, the car? Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like Bowser versus everybody else. It was Bowser was way overpowered. It was not a good game.
Yeah.
So my point being, like, we'll get another one of those that will mostly probably do what Jamboree did, if not even improve on it, right? I think when they make a Helldivers 3, I don't know that Helldivers 3 can recapture what Helldivers 2 was. And that almost sounds like a slight, but I don't mean it that way. I mean, I think it's magic in a bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think, like, on that same, like, we've said a few times that's like, will people return to this in a few years? No, but with others, yes. I almost wonder that even that makes it a better argument for why it's game of this year. Of like the magic it holds is like it happens now. So kind of like what you were just saying, that it's magical right now in this moment, and even if that magic doesn't continue, that doesn't take away from what it is right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's always the issue, right? Of like talking about the Oscars. Or I think maybe the Grammys is a better example of that, right? Like people always like go and they say, oh, 30 years ago, this won record of the year at the Grammys. And like these 10 songs are much more popular and famous and have lasted much better. And it's like, yeah, but the Grammys is of the moment, right? Like they don't know what the legacy is going to be. They don't know that this song isn't going to have the long tail that these others are. And you know, that sort of like legacy is difficult to evaluate right now because honestly, none of us know. I mean, if they follow up Astro Bot with 10 bad Astro Bot sequels, then probably none of us look on Astro Bot nearly as favorably.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I would say the same thing about Final Fantasy there. Like, I think if they botch the third Final Fantasy game, what is that called?
Well, we don't know what it's called yet.
Oh, have they not announced it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be something. I
Right.
think it'll be Reconciliation, but we don't have an official.
Okay. I thought they had announced, but like, you know, if they botch that third one, then that tarnishes the first two, right? Like, like, does it fair? Is that fair? No, but like the reality is, we will all look at it that way, right? But like again, we're looking at these right now. Like we don't know, like we can't guess at what that'll be. So I guess before we slot in Helldivers, right? We should talk about the other game that's still on this list, which is Balatro.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have talked about Balatro an awful lot this year on this podcast. So I feel like that's why we have not said a word about it so far.
It's probably no surprise that it's our top one because, like, we mentioned several times, especially because, like, for a while, that's what a lot of us were playing / watching. Like, because it is one of those games that once you pick it up, it becomes pretty addicting. And then you can put it down for a while, and then you're like, you know what, I think I'll pick that back up. And then all of a sudden, all of that comes back. So, I think it's a pretty easy number one, at least for, like I said, the collective of this podcast.
Yeah, I think there was one, like, early on in our, when we were talking about it, I think there was a day that I had said something like, oh yeah, I think I played maybe like 20 hours of it. Later that day, I went on my Steam and looked, and it was like 60 hours, and I was like, oh well, you know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of scared to look at my numbers.
I haven't played it. Like I said, I haven't played it in quite a while. It's like I got through all of those challenges, and that felt like my moment to put it down.
Yeah.
But it's by far the game I played the most this year. It was a pretty easy number one because I think that's one of those games that will probably just like perpetually stay installed on my computer because it's one that is just like easy to return to.
Yeah.
And I think one of the cool things about a roguelike is that, you know, and I've done this with others, if you return to it in a year, you almost like lose the touch that you had, and so you like get to relearn how to play it, and you get to like re-experience it in some ways. And I think that
the Binding of Isaac was in my top 10 for that reason, because it's one that I return to a lot, either watching or playing, because I'll forget what the items are, or I'll forget what the like how they synchronize with each other. And so when I return to it, not only is each level different, but it honestly feels like a very different game.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just checked. I am in triple digits for this game this year, which like I must have left it on pause or something because
Yeah, sure.
well, I'm saying the actual number is like is higher than I think is like humanly possible.
But also, like you said several times, this is the game I put on when I'm doing other things.
Yeah.
It's a podcast game.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I feel like this podcast, speaking of which,
We know you're playing Balatro while you're listening to this, so you're welcome for putting your favorite game as number one as well.
look, I am playing it right now as I am like on this podcast. But I feel like it is. I could have it on my phone. Why do I not have it on my phone? It's such an oversight.
Because then you won't be confused about the triple digits.
Right. Yeah. Then I would completely understand. You know, I feel like on this podcast, we have oftentimes like chosen these sorts of games. And I understand people can go, well, why aren't you choosing the more hardcore Helldivers 2? Why aren't you choosing the more big budget Indiana Jones, like, or Final Fantasy, right? And I think the thing that it always comes back to is like, what is the game that we're all playing? What is the game that's like addictive to us? What is the game that defined the year for us in video games? And for me, like, you know, for my top 10 list, I put Astro Bot above it because I think Astro Bot's a better game, right? But I spent more time playing Balatro, and I think Balatro is maybe like the game of the year from the collective video game community. Like, it is the game I probably heard more people talking about, more people discussing than any other game that came out this year. And there's something kind of amazing when games like this and Vampire Survivors and Marvel Snap, like these little smaller, relative is a term, right? Because a lot of these games have pretty big budgets. But these smaller games come out and they just capture everyone because they kind of return to what matters most at the end of the day, which is the gameplay.
Gambling. No, gameplay, yeah.
And, you know, the fact that this is really
Well,
easy.
you're just having fun, I think.
Yeah. I think this is a really easy game to pick up and play. So we mentioned that with Mini Shoot and Astro Bot. Like, this is a really easy game. Like, you have to understand the basics of poker, but you don't really have to understand any of the strategy of poker.
Yep.
So I think it's really accessible. This is the sort of game, like, you know, I would recommend to my brother who doesn't play a lot of modern video games because he does play poker, and like I think he would get into it really quickly. And, you know, and it's also a game that's like addictive. I don't know that there's any other game on this list this year that was as addictive to me as Balatro, where I was like, I need to play this game. Or that, you know, you'd sit down and start playing, like, I've got 30 minutes to play this game, and then, oh my God, 2.5 hours have passed.
That's how you got to the triple digit.
Look, I am in somewhat denial over the amount of time, but, like, I completely understand what was happening.
Yeah.
It was like those 4 days in June that I lost. Somebody finally like got through to me and like, had grown a beard. I look like Tom Hanks in Castaway.
Your cats are like headbutting you, like, dude, we're hungry.
Yeah. Feed us.
We're gonna start eating you. Like, that's what happens.
Oh man, the media would have a field day with that story. Man eaten alive by cats because he's addicted to video games.
Yeah, well, let's be real. The media would be more interested. Was it a violent video game? Oh, no, it's a gambling one? Well, there's still a vice there.
Yeah, it's gambling. Like, it's sinful. Like, so, I mean, we just talked a lot about it. We've talked about it all year. Balatro is one of those rare games that just captures everyone. And it does it better than, I think, any other game this year. So we're going to put Helldivers at 2 and Balatro at 1.
Yep.
All right. Before we officially set this, speak now or forever hold your peace. Is there anybody want to make a last-ditch argument for repositioning of this top 10?
Well, now that we're done, Liar's Bar. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
The first game we cut.
Yeah. I was like...
I think Call of
Maybe
Duty
the
was the
second
first
game.
one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe something more reasonable, like this game goes up or this game drops a position.
Well, one thing I haven't mentioned is Dead by Daylight. This entire game.
This has been really hard for her because not a podcast goes
We
by.
even
Dead by
mentioned
Daylight
Jason.
comes in with the money in the bank briefcase to cash in, win the championship.
Nick Cage just throws it on the...
You know, he would do it if they paid
He
him enough.
would.
And they don't have to pay him a lot because he's desperate.
No, he loved doing the voice in it because apparently his son plays.
Oh, yeah.
And so he was like, this makes me cool. And I was like,
That's like, there's an interview with Robert Langella where he's talking about playing Skeletor in the Masters of the Universe movie. And they were like, they asked him, they were like, what do you think about, how did they convince you to do that? He said, oh, that's one of my favorite roles of my entire career. And they were like, really? And he said, my son was 3 years old and he was the biggest He-Man fan. And he said, I got to be the biggest hero in the world playing Skeletor. And I just thought, like, sometimes we overlook like just the joy of
Yeah.
doing the dumb role can bring to somebody.
Yeah.
Well, that's like Raul Julia took the role in Street Fighter because his kids were Street Fighter fans.
Yeah. And he's great in it.
He's phenomenal.
He's the only good thing in that movie. He's acting in a different film than, Kylie Minogue is. So, any last arguments we want to make? All right. Well, then let's set it. Our top 10 games of 2024 are at number 10, Mario Party Jamboree. At number 9, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. At number 8, Thank Goodness You're Here. At number 7, Mini Shoot Adventures. At number 6, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. At number 5, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. At number 4, UFO 50. At number 3, Astro Bot. At number 2, Helldivers 2. And the least surprising number 1, Balatro.
Yay.
Woo!
That is your Saluki Gamescast top 10 of the year.
We did it.
And
Third time was in fact the charm.
I feel like maybe less fighting this year than we've had in the past. I feel like we've gotten very contentious at times in the past.
I mean, is that been on years and like OJ? I'm just kidding.
Are we blaming OJ? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
OJ is the source of all chaos.
Well, I feel like last year it was only 3 of us because OJ couldn't make it for whatever reason.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
So dang it, we can't blame them.
So maybe year 1 it was more contentious.
Yeah.
I feel like also this is the one year that like number 1 was no question whatsoever.
I mean, I'm not surprised, but I assumed since both of you had Astro Bot as your number 1 game, I thought I would have more pushback when I put it up earlier.
I didn't rank mine on my top
maybe
10.
it was just the last one that I read then.
Probably, yeah. Because I just made a list.
Yeah. I don't think hers are ranked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had Balatro as number 2 on my list. And it was really a thing of, at the end of the day, it was a toss-up. Right? Like at some point, all of these become a toss-up, right?
Sure.
Like when we make a top 10, I know, like, I think maybe Jesse's is an unordered top 10 list. And when I did my top 10 films this year, like I just did an unordered list.
Yeah.
Like these are my 10 favorite films I saw this year. There's not like a number 1 because I don't really know.
Yeah.
It's hard to rank them. That's why I was like asking like what is in our criterion here? Is community?
Yeah.
Is nostalgia? And I think depending on the game, the genre of game, like that plays into things differently.
Yeah, it's what you're kind of talking about as well. I think any sort of ranking is going to be a little ephemeral, right? Like
Yes.
you ask somebody, if we were to do this tomorrow, the list might look a little different.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So
Yeah. And I mean, like,
this top 10 might be the same, but you might have some slightly different movement in there.
Organization, yeah.
at the time we're recording this, I believe Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came out on PC today. So there's a good chance I will play that sometime in the next month.
I'll be like, I'm sorry, Alicia.
Well, it might very well change my ranking. Like it might make me more of a fan or less of a fan. I don't know.
For
like
sure.
looking at it, but like I look at these top 10 and I think, would I feel comfortable giving this top 10 list to somebody and saying, hey, if you missed games this year, here are 10 games you should check out.
Yeah.
And I think all 10 of these are games that people should check out. And I think, of course, just like with us, not all of us played all 10 of these games. I think when you look at a list like this, you should look at it and say, which of these games tickles my fancy? Which of these games like appeals to me personally? And not all of them are. Like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is not going to appeal to everyone because lots of people don't like Japanese RPGs. But like also a lot of people don't like platformers and aren't going to like Astro Bot, right? Like, so you should look at it and, use your discretion and say, hey, this game looks cool to me. I like what you said about it in the discussion. That's the reason we have the discussion.
Yeah.
We could do all this off air. because we think that's of value in helping people determine which of these games they want to play. And I would extend that out to actually most of the games on the top 21 that we started with. Like maybe not Power World, but, but most of the rest of the games on that list, I think, are all games of value that people should check out. All right, that does it. A reminder again, like this will be up on SalukiGames.com. Our first part of our Game of the Year where we did the awards, that is up there. Our 100th episode celebration is also up there. So 3 podcasts that came out in the same week, which is just about killing us to get all done. We will return to regular podcast scheduling starting after this week. And but then also those individual lists, which again, right, like I think those are all of value because you go and you start looking through those. There's a lot of games on those lists that I did not play, where somebody else played it, somebody else engaged in with it. And even some things like, I know that Christina, you talked about Dead by Daylight. Here's an older game, a live service game, but like a live service game that has obviously evolved this year.
There were several on my list, like Binding of Isaac got an update this year. Mortuary Assistant got an update this year. So like I included those because of the updates. You know.
And then, Mario, of course, did his ranking of N64 games, and I think that's always really interesting to go read. It's much easier today to emulate N64 games, so you don't even need to have your own N64. And it's interesting to go back and look at some of those games because there's a lot of those games that, don't have that name brand to them like an Ocarina of Time or a Mario 64 from that era do. And so they kind of get lost. I think a lot of that library of that system gets lost. And you've talked about it on the podcast. You talked about it on your list with Castlevania. And, the fact that game has had this sort of reevaluation critically over the years, I think is really fascinating. And then, Alicia has her list with, I think, a lot of games that are, I know you
I have fun making up award names.
Yeah, you like do your superlatives, and you had like your cozy game of the year. But like I think a lot of your games kind of fall under that cozy category, and so I know people who exclusively play that type of game, and so like Alicia's list is really cool to go look at for that. And then of course Kevin and Mario or Kevin and Scott and Jesse and everyone else who produced a list, OJ, all their lists bring some of those unique qualities as well. So check all of those out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, the 3 of you, for joining me. And nobody like poking an eye out over disagreements. And we'll be back soon with our regularly scheduled program. But it was a great 2024 for games. Check out some of these games, and we'll talk.